Welcome, everyone, to By the Way to Purposeful Procurement. Right about now, you're probably thinking, Phil sounds weird. Well, that's because this is your deputy host, Rich Ham. I'm also the CEO of Fine Tune by Day. I am joined at my left by our fearless leader, Grand Poobah of Art of Procurement, the CEO and co-founder, managing director. I'm leaving any titles out there,
Just
Phil?
whatever you want to go with.
Very good, yes.
I basically do, between Kelly and I, we do a lot of things. So.
Yeah, the fearless leader, Grand Poobah, yes. Most valuable player, Kelly Barner, not joining us today, but she will again soon. Really excited for this episode today. We're going to be joined by Paul Polizzotto, and we're going to focus on a theme of, as we explore these other ways that procurement could and should be driving value, and does to an extent today, but could and should be driving additional value if barriers to purposeful procurement were stripped out of the system. One of those certainly is the ability to impact communities, social impact, community impact, and Paul has spent his career in that space. And before we bring Paul in, I want to hearken back to a thing that Kate Vitasic said a few episodes back in a really great conversation. And if you haven't listened, I would urge listeners to go back and listen to By the Way sequentially, and particularly the episode with Kate was fantastic. And Kate noted that there was a time in the not too distant past where business almost always tended to be done locally. We did business with our neighbors in our communities. And by the nature of that fact, it was almost assured that any given community would be made better for the presence of any given business within it. And the reason is, if it wasn't that way, they're going to run your ass out of town. You don't get to continue doing business. There's Paul, everybody, as we welcome Paul Polizzotto. You don't get to stay in a community that you're not good for if you're not good for it when all business is done locally. However, in 2025, what dominates the business landscape? Multinational conglomerates, multi-billion-dollar companies. And, I think it feels more difficult to make that demand that a business be good for the places where it exists. And probably large multinational corporations have often felt emboldened by their power and their size, that the answer to that question, are you good for this place or not, doesn't really have to be yes. You like the jobs, you like the revenue it brings to the locality, and so deal with it if we're not good for you community in some form or fashion. Well, Paul Polizzotto, who is the founder and CEO of a company called Community AI, and in his past, we're going to ask him about his story. He was the founder and CEO of a company called EcoMedia, which he sold to CBS and ran within CBS for a number of years. Paul has spent his career trying to help businesses have a better answer to that question, trying to help them have a better answer to the question, are you good for the communities in which you operate? There's actually quite a bit more to Paul's story than just that, but I think it is through the lens of social impact, community impact, and are businesses good for the communities in which they operate. It is through that lens that we'll have this conversation with Paul today. So without further ado, Paul Polizzotto, thank you for joining us. Welcome to By the Way.
Well, thank you very much, Rich and Phil, and great to be reconnected with Phil. Thanks for having me. Rich, in the lead-in, you talked about businesses being good for the community, which I think is essential, of course. But in the process, these businesses are made more successful. I think it's really important that people understand that, at least in my career, the funding that I've brought to local communities around the world has all been the product of making businesses more successful. In fact, I've actually made a really strict point out of not tapping corporate foundations for the monies that I bring to communities, because I wanted corporations to do whatever they were doing already, just keep doing what you're doing from your corporate foundation. I wanted to bring new money to communities by making suppliers more successful and by addressing very specific business KPIs for those suppliers, and really turning social impact from a cost center into a revenue generator. Because in my view, really bringing significant funding to communities in some sort of scalable and sustainable way can only be done by making corporates more successful. Doing it out of corporate foundations and CSR budgets, it's simply not going to get it done. And so I think the onus is on us as entrepreneurs to create ways where businesses become more successful. How do they have better win rates, shorter sales cycles, better client retention? How do they use existing dollars that they're spending in a way that they receive an improved ROI? I'm talking about the supplier side,
Mm-hmm.
all of which becomes additional value for buyers.
Paul, and it's not just theory; it has been done, and this opens the door for you to maybe share with our listeners. Give them a few minutes on the company that you founded, EcoMedia, and maybe walk us through the journey and what EcoMedia did, because I find it to be a
Yeah.
fascinating story.
Well, Rich, you know that I was not actually from the ad business. I was from the social impact phase. I'm 36 years a serious social entrepreneur. But it was funny. The first industry that I brought this idea of turning social impact from a cost center into a revenue generator was actually the media and advertising business for two reasons. Um, One was that the industry at that time, I'm talking about the early 2000s, was undergoing immense pressure, fragmentation, commoditization, competition. And I wanted to show that one broadcaster that used social impacts as a sales incentive could take business away from other broadcasters. And we entered into a
Mm,
joint venture with CBS in 2008, 2009, where that value proposition had large advertisers shifting away from ABC, NBC, and Fox to CBS. And we used that shift to fund green schools initiatives all over the country. So we were
mm,
using that funding to put solar panels in schools and fund energy efficiency retrofits and plant organic gardens and teach kids how to grow their own food and cook their own food. We were attaching STEM education uh, to those to those programs. And then we were using the sale of a commodity, a 30-second ad unit, which is usually forgotten after those 30 seconds, into an agent for positive social change. We were using that 30-second ad unit to fund solar panels on libraries, parks, city halls. The City Hall of Miami became the first big city hall to be powered by renewable energy, and there were no taxpayer dollars in that project whatsoever. And we had to engineer that solar installation to withstand 140-mile-an-hour hurricane force winds because it's of course in a hurricane zone. That joint venture won the 2009 Award of Excellence from the U.S. Conference of Mayors for being the #1 public-private partnership in the nation.
mm.
CBS grew very interested in purchasing our company. They purchased it in 2010, Rich, and it went on to become the fastest growing division of CBS. And we were able to direct more than $600 million of incremental ad revenues to CBS. And we directed more than $100 million of new funding and resources to communities around the country and positively impacted the lives of more than 60 million people. And so I was quite proud of that work. But there was one other thing that was going on, Rich, and that was it was my first exposure way back then to cause marketing. And I was
Mm.
looking at cause marketing because, I'm from the space, and I was like, so cause marketing looks to me like a brand sharing something with a consumer about something that happened in the past, something good they did in the past. So it looked to me historical facing, backward facing. And I thought, I wonder if the future of cause marketing could be forward facing, where something measurable, tangible happens in local communities because brands and consumers agree. And when brands and consumers agree, really great things happen for brands. And I was really interested in this idea of story, empathy, action in real time. And when brands underwrite human empathy, really great things happen for brands. And so those were the two things that were going
Mm.
through my mind at that time. And it became an enormously successful division of CBS. And I'm quite proud of the work that we did.
Now, Paul, I know that you ultimately bought EcoMedia out of CBS after there was Viacom came in as change of leadership, and you decided you
Yeah.
wanted to pull the enterprise out. And today, for those of our listeners that may not be aware, you're joining us from London. Now, there was some news back in February. Parliament had updated the Procurement Act of 2023 with a new social value requirement. Specifically, this new law requires a 10% weighting of social value in all public contracts. And so I have two questions on this. Number one, does the fact that I just shared have anything to do with the fact that you are in London right now and that you have in fact moved to London? And two, what can you tell us about how the Social Value Act is changing the way the British government procures goods and services?
It's funny that you say that, Rich. I'm from Manhattan Beach, California, and I tell people here in London that I moved here for the weather. But yeah, I now live in London, and yes, I am here because, in part, because of the Social Value Act. The Social Value Act goes back to 2012. It was a voluntary program, and it became compulsory in 2020. And Rich, you were referring earlier of some amendments that were made to the Social Value Act in February that it created even a more stringent framework for procurement and suppliers to adhere to. And so, yeah, that's why I'm here. But one of the things I was really excited about years ago was this idea of the Social Value Act. I thought, wow, that's really cool. Like, imagine a regulatory framework where public sector procurement, when they spend a pound with a supplier, they're applying a word criteria to that supplier based on, if I spend a pound with you, what kind of community impact does that create for my community? And so I was really intrigued at that. I came over several years ago, and we applied our platform as a pilot to Metropolitan Police, which is Met Police, which is really the police of the UK, Scotland Yard.
Hmm.
And they embedded our platform in their procurement motions where they said, hey, and they called the RFPs tenders here. And so they were putting out tenders saying, hey, we're looking for widgets, best pricing, best terms. We're not going to pay more for the widgets, but we're looking for your response to this tender to include funding for impact that reduces crime. How can we use our procurement power to really directly reduce crime? Because that's what we're here for. And so we started funding programs like street games and Red Thread and Groundworks and engaging youth, disenfranchised youth and other disenfranchised portions of the population to get engaged and to be less likely to produce crime. And it was really successful. And also, Rich, we were also doing our impact advertising here, with Audi and Nike and HSBC and Marks and Spencer and so on, Kimberly Clark, and that was working great. But Rich, I wasn't ready to set up shop here. I was like, I'm not so sure I really want to set up a full-time operation over there. But I made a note. Wow, it works. Our idea works well, and our platform works well there. So I came over in January. Okay, I packed 2 weeks worth of clothes. I was here for 2.5 months and only went home for 6 days to pack my stuff because I moved here. Um, and it has absolutely taken off here. I am literally crisscrossing this country every day. I'm in Leeds, Leicester, Tees Valley, Manchester, Birmingham, Newcastle, you name it. And this is an extraordinary country, Rich. But the local communities are quite distressed. You'd be shocked at how many of these local governments are bankrupt.
Hmm.
Birmingham is the largest local authority in Europe, and they're bankrupt.
Hmm.
And so, we're looking for ways to bring, public sector procurement more value, without them having to raise taxes, borrow more, or sell more municipal assets in order to tend to their most pressing challenges. And so it's absolutely taken off. We just signed up Birmingham, which for logical reasons, as I just expressed. And we're signing up some of the largest corporations in the UK. And so it's absolutely taken off here. So yeah, I
Yep.
I live here now.
As somebody who knows some of those locations very well, you talked of, and also knows Manhattan Beach very well, I commend you on making that move because Manhattan Beach is a very hard place to leave behind. When I think about it, from when I put my procurement hat on, I look at, suppliers committing to make additional investments as as a reason for winning, that goes into their bid package to go win some business. You said with the Met Police, for example, doing some initiatives beyond that. My procurement hat goes immediately to, well, we're just going to pay for that in a different way. And so I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit of your experiences in terms of this isn't necessarily additive cost for the enterprise or the organization that's buying and how that kind of works.
No, I appreciate the question, Bill, because it really is the most central question. Like in the minds of merchants, they're like, wait a minute. If I'm going to get 2% for impact in my community, am I paying 2% more?
Right.
And aren't they going to put that into the price of the product or service in any case? Or the reverse of that, does that mean my supplier's margin is 2% lower? And so the first question, Phil, is yeah, no, the buyers are really not paying 2% more for the products or services. And guess what? The supplier's margin, corporate, I'm talking about corporate margin, is
Hmm.
actually better. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute, that's voodoo economics. How does that work? I'm not clear. Um, Mainly, Phil, because it actually has nothing to do with the price of the widget. It has nothing to do with the transaction. These suppliers, um, the Fortune 500 is spending 10 to 30% of their gross revenues on SG&A, sales and sales related expenses. So what's in that? Well, certainly comp plans, commission plans, but what else? Advertising, marketing, PR, corporate communications, events, conferences, white papers, and you name it, Phil. And so these companies, are they building those things into the price of the product? Clearly. But you know what's interesting, Phil? And I jokingly say, but almost jokingly, I kind of mean this. We're not funding impact on behalf of procurement organizations from precious profits. Because if you are, that's not scalable and sustainable. We're actually funding impact from corporate waste. Okay. And I always
Mm,
joke around that we're funding impact from corporate waste because that's where the big money is. These companies are wasting more money than they're making. And so what we're doing, Phil, is our competition at Community AI is not unlike Community AI. Our competition is where are those companies currently spending that money? And
Hmm.
how do we go to a supplier and say, look, you're currently spending money in all of these areas. First of all, the procurement organizations are not tapping into any of that money. Let's be clear about that. And so what we're doing is we're tapping procurement organizations into dollars those corporates are spending in any case, for which the procurement organizations are not getting any benefit from. And so what we do is we go to suppliers and say, we're not asking you to spend a dollar more. We're asking you to consider redeploying the dollar that you're already spending somewhere where you know you're wasting it. Like we joke around. We just talked about my background in advertising. The joke is, I know I'm wasting 50% of my advertising. I just don't know which
Hmm.
50%. And so these suppliers are leaking millions and billions all over the place. And we want to make those suppliers more successful so they can direct benefit for procurement organizations and not charge more for the products and services. We call that CSROI, corporate social return on investment. So our
mm,
job is to make sure that if we bring impact to communities, whether that be B2B or B2G, that they don't pay more for products and services. And we're actually making suppliers more successful because we're giving them a better ROI on a dollar they're spending in any case. And so I say that we're really turning waste into energy. And I think you guys are aware of an industry called waste to
mm.
energy,
Sure.
right? And we think of corporations as physical buildings, okay? Physical buildings that have divisions like sales and marketing and HR and IR and government affairs, public affairs. So how do you wire those buildings to take that energy and direct it to these corporations, seller, buyer, impact partner, in a way that's quite precise? Because some corporations say, well, we're already doing that. We're already adding this sort of little thing to impact as part of our. That's not what we're talking about here. Like keep doing that, but that's not what we're talking about here. What our platform's involved in doing is applying AI to understanding what are the most important critical issue areas in a given community. In the UK, we've mapped that all the way down to the neighborhood. There's 2.8 million postcodes here in the UK. We've zeroed that down to the neighborhood. So we know which issue areas are most crucial in a given area, which interventions applied to that issue area does a pound create 4 or 5 pounds benefit? And then which impact partners on the ground are best equipped at delivering that intervention to that issue area where they can give us that multiplying effect and give us reporting that has veracity. That's not happening in these corporate, sort of gifting kinds of, or contributions or donation kinds of things. And that's because these communities have enormous challenges, and the people in these communities deserve better. And the beauty of AI and technology is we can now start delivering impact with precision, and we can make scarce dollars go further, because I just said these communities are bankrupt. And so we have to do less with more. I mean, more with
That's
less is what I should say. Never mind. You get it. You
we
know what I'm
we
saying?
won't
So,
hold you
so
we won't hold
we
you to
have to
less
do,
with more.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Paul,
no, please. Yeah,
is
yeah,
this the
yeah.
so this if I'm hearing you right, it's almost like community AI is it's like EcoMedia 2.0, where AI, the role that AI plays, if
Yeah.
I'm understanding it right, is to help you with efficiency identify what are the most acute problems in any given locality, and then direct and also identify potential partners to help you solve those very community challenges. Do I have that right?
You've got that absolutely right on the community impact side, Rich. But one of the other things that I found when I came over here to the UK was, as much as I loved the Social Value Act, aspirationally, I thought it was really great. But what I found was the math was really fuzzy. That there really
Mm.
was no veracity around the reporting. And so one of the other things I wanted to do was bring greater veracity around the reporting. And I wanted to focus the impact on the S in ESG. Because I think we've always sort of had an uppercase E, a lowercase s, and an uppercase G. Corporates and communities never really understood how to fund S, how to measure S. And so what we wanted to do was create an uppercase S and bring much greater veracity to S, so that we could create an entirely new funding stream for communities while making corporations more successful. And that's a big issue here, Rich,
Mm.
is that it's not just about community needs, it's about economic growth. The UK is really struggling to grow economically. And so you really have to put the two together. You have to
Mm.
have economic growth that also creates new ways of solving community challenges by making businesses more successful.
Phil, I know you've got questions, but I'll get in with one last one here. I love this waste to energy
Hmm.
analogy. I think that's great. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it seems that a fundamental argument that you're making is that if you were to rank the entire universe of sales and marketing and advertising spend that the average large corporation invests in their sales and marketing and advertising, and ranked it in order of the most effective dollar to the least effective dollar within that universe. And I think the argument you're making is a dollar towards social impact is way above the midline, is and perhaps even close to the top, is some of the most effective investment that can be made in that universe. Do I have that right?
You have that right, but guess who the biggest winner of that is?
Hmm.
Procurement. What I'm saying is that, okay, let's talk about advertising. I gave you SG&A, okay? Marketing, advertising, events, conferences. Okay, procurement organization, how much benefit are you getting from a supplier's advertising and marketing and PR, corporate communications, events, conferences? Zero. And so what I'm trying to do is say, hey, when a supplier applies impact with a procurement organization, that procurement organization is getting credit for that impact, and it's being shared with that procurement organization. And so it's all about value for procurement, because again, no matter how much that supplier spends on advertising, events and conferences and everything else, it does absolutely nothing for that procurement organization. And so when people say, "Well, aren't they just going to build impact into the price of the product?" Like, they're building advertising, marketing, PR, corporate communications, events, and conferences into. And you're
Hmm.
not getting any of that value, zero. And now I'm getting procurement organizations value from those dollars that corporations are spending in any case. That's about value for procurement, Rich. And so they're
Hmm.
not paying more for products and services, and they're getting more value. And I think that's critical that I make the point as to how procurement wins from this.
So I'm just trying to think about the mechanics, just so that to make it kind of relatable for procurement folks that might be listening. So you kind of referred to before in terms of the Met Police example, you would put a tender or an RFP out in the market, and as part of that RFP or the tender, you would require there be a commitment towards, of a certain value of what that tender or the RFP response is towards a particular social impact program. Is that kind of how it works? And then are you being what's the right word? Are you saying it should be one of these projects? Or are you leaving that open to the respondent to suggest and recommend projects?
Great question. So yeah, first of all, it's not mandatory. It's voluntary, and all they do is put a little link in the tender, and you click on it, and it tells you exactly what to do. So it's not a lot of extra work for procurement. And then to your second point, which is yes, the way it's set up, Phil, is that the issue area that the supplier is going to fund is going to be consistent with the supplier's objectives as well. So really, there's sort of 6 A's in what we do. The first A is analytics. So we want to understand in a really granular fashion what's going on in these communities, and then we want to understand what the corporations are doing in the way of CSR sustainability, which UN SDGs are they committed to, and what are they doing around climate and so on. And so we have also very detailed information on corporates. So we have analytics. The next A is really to your point, Phil. It's about alignment. Where is this corporation aligned with these community needs? Okay. And then the third A is action. So based on the fact that the supplier and the buyer are aligned here, here's a recommendation engine that suggests which community, which issue area, which intervention is best aligned with those goals and objectives. And both sides get that reporting, they get content, they get everything. So the fourth and fifth A's are attribution and assurance. That's audit. So essentially, if a corporation is going to fund a particular project in a local community, what's that baseline, and what specific impact did that corporation have on lifting or improving that baseline, and how does that set that corporation up for assurance, which is third-party audit? Because in the issues of ESG and ESRS, CSRD, third-party audits required. And then the sixth A, Rich and Phil, is amplification, storytelling. Because look, reporting's great and it might be required, but those reports are flat. They're one-dimensional. They're important, but there's nothing like bringing those stories to life with award-winning video, photography, and social posts. And how do you use that? I'm talking about both seller and buyer and community to improve employee engagement, employee retention, improve recruiting yield. How do you take the stories for which the seller and the buyer are involved in and share them on both sides with employees and investors and other stakeholders to squeeze every ounce of value out of the transaction that takes place between the seller and the buyer? We're turning transactions into a partnership between the seller and the buyer, where we're strengthening the business results of both sides. And and it's something, as Rich pointed out earlier, this isn't aspirational or conceptual or theoretical or academic. This is a proven business model. We've been doing this for a very, very long time. And so it's just, I'm now doing it full time in the UK, but there's nothing, in my view, I know this sounds maybe crazy, but I don't think this is the least bit complicated. It's just original. And when something's original, it requires explanation. But the idea that both suppliers and buyers derive more value from doing business like this, that's not open for debate. That's not open for debate.
So I have one last question, and I'll let you lead us out, Rich.
Yeah.
But my follow-up kind of question is around because we want to talk about incentives. We're talking about incentives in this podcast series. How are you seeing that the organizations that are embedding this in their procurement kind of operating model, if you will, the way that they go to market, how are they incenting their team members to do this? To build this into their tenders, into their RFPs, or that procurement itself is reporting this as one of their value drivers and value measures to the bigger organizers, the greater stakeholders. I just wondered any tips or advice or experiences that you've seen that helps us think about, how can we make this as part of our balanced scorecard, which then of course is what drives the action.
Well, so the way to do that is on sell side and buy side to build it right into the tools that the sellers are already using to sell and buy. So you're going to build it. You can build. We have 3 products in the Salesforce app exchange, so you can build it right into sales CRMs like Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics, or on the procurement side, whether that be SAP, Ariba, or you could easily, or you could build it right into those the tools that the sellers and buyers already use to sell and buy. And then, Phil, a step further is to build it right into the ESG and social impact or sustainability software that these sellers and buyers are using, whether that be Workiva or whether that be IBM's Invisi. It could be any one of those platforms that they're already using to measure their sustainability, social impact, and everything from scope 3 to you name it. We want to integrate right into those tools because, Rich and Phil, you guys know that both sides of the transaction, these folks are busy. They've got lots and lots and lots of pressures. And so it's on us to make sure that we can embed our solution right into the tools they're already using and make it very, very, very easy. And make the business results really profound. Otherwise, you can't scale. You got to make it easy, and you got to make the results very easy. You got to make it easy for those results to be shared with other divisions within the company. And we've done some really extensive work. It was done early on with BCG around how procurement organizations, in fact, their work showed that C-suite, and they did 500 different interviews, said that procurement organizations that embed this type of thing in their procurement, 92% of CEOs said that will lift procurement's importance in the corporation and their relevance in the corporation. And so I think, when you look at the C-suite and they understand that the decisions that procurement is making can affect HR, IR, marketing, government affairs, a whole myriad of different divisions in the company, objectives in the company, KPIs in the company. It makes the procurement division of a company far more valuable to that company.
If I could note something, Phil and Paul, it's that, outside of the words like the and, I think the most common word throughout this conversation is probably value. And I've talked with Paul before about this, and we in the context of our whole project here, which is that we're using some of the wrong terminology, and we've defined certain terms improperly, and the whole way that the incentive structures that have been set up have promoted something less than optimal value creation as an output from procurement. Paul, maybe we could close with this. And by the way, before we wrap up, by the way, for those of you playing the by the way drinking game at home, that was I think that was our first of this episode, so you're relatively sober. Before we close, I try to finish on aspirational and optimistic notes here, and it seems to me that in a perfect future state where we stripped away barriers to purposeful procurement, that procurement actually has massive power to change not only the business for the better, but to change the world outside the business for the better. And I think that your career has probably given you some unique perspective on the sort of hidden power that lies within corporate purchasing. What would you have to say to our listeners about that topic as we envision a more purposeful procurement?
Well, I hope, although it's original, and I hope I explained it well enough to say that, Rich, procurement organizations can embed impact in their RFPs and tenders and not pay more for products and services, and have suppliers fund projects in the buyer's community that are most critical to that community and drive business value for that procurement organization, and at the same time make the supplier more successful as well. It's not either or. It really is not. And I think impact can be embedded into the actual fabric of the company, and where the real money is. The real money is not in sustainability or CSR or social impact or corporate foundations. I mean, there's not real money there. In fact, in this economy, those things are being stressed. And so,
Mm.
Rich, I think that procurement organizations have an enormous opportunity to work with their suppliers in a partnership for which the procurement organizations get more value. They make their suppliers more successful, and their dealings together become a partnership where both businesses are more successful, but then again, the communities in which they work and live, going back to the point you made at the very, very beginning, Rich,
Mm.
um, are made more resilient, and that we're improving the quality of people's lives in those communities, which actually also makes the businesses more successful. I mean, let's face it, the more we can help with job training and helping to prepare the next generation for the jobs in the future. All these, we could talk for hours about it, but there's no question that procurement organizations have an enormous opportunity here, that's in their best interest.
Paul, I have to commend you on the way you just, not only made in the process of making a reference to a more sustainable sort of business, a business that embraces circularity. You actually brought the interview full circle. That was an outstanding dismount. Thank you so much, Paul Polizzotto, for joining us today. That was a great conversation.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. We appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks, Rich and Phil. Thanks for having me, guys. Have a great rest of the day.
It was a pleasure. You too, Paul. Take care.